welcome back everyone. Today I'm going to be reviewing a book written by the former Chief Justice of India, Ranjan Gogoi. The name of the book is Justice for the Judge. As I just said, Justice Ranjan Gogoi was the 46th Chief Justice of India, and he was a very controversial figure while he was in office, and he also took part in some other controversy before he took office. We'll discuss everything about his career as a judge, and even before that when he was a child, and then when he came to college, and we will be talking about all of his life and try to get a wholesome perspective about his life and not just the controversies, because he has tried to tell a lot of things about himself in this book, because it is an autobiography. It starts from his childhood and goes till the last thing that was the last big thing that he did, that was accepting the nomination to Rajya Sabha under Article 80 of the Constitution. So he starts the book by portraying himself as a man who's very virtuous, because he belongs to a family from the northeast which is very virtuous, and a kind of a kid who has been taught a lot of manners by his children, by his parents. His father, when he was a teenager, almost, his father was the CM of the state, but for a very short while. His mother was a social worker and a housemaker, and he belongs to a family of politicians. Even his maternal his mother's family, her father and her mother, they all belong to the political class, and that's how he can be said to be a person who came from a very well connected family. Even his sister is an IAS officer, and a brother is in Air Force and things like that. So all of these people, in one way or another, helping in governance of the country. Then he talks about how he went to a very good school, almost the best school in the city, and then when he came to Delhi, he got into St. Stephen's. And the reason that he says that he was able to come to Delhi and join St. Stephen's was because his mother valued education a lot, and that's how she pushed him towards coming to Delhi University and get enrolled in St. Stephen's for higher education. And then he talks about how he was allotted a room in the hostel, and he talks about a lot of nitty gritty, and he remembers a lot of memories about how mess had a lot of different kinds of food to offer, and these kind of things. Then he talks about how he got into the Faculty of Law. The Faculty of Law today is considered the foremost legal education institute if you are trying to pursue 3-year course. But he remembers that at that time when he took admission in that course, there was no entrance at all. You just went there and got yourself enrolled. But today there is an exam, an entrance called DULLB, which one has to crack and get that rank to get there. He talks about how both of his children gave their entrance to get in this department of law, Faculty of Law. Then there's this one memory that he shares of his brother. When his brother was in Air Force, there was on this canteen, wine is freely available, not like freely available, but at very reasonable prices. So he used to go to his brother in Chandigarh, and mostly on weekends. So when he would return, his hostel mates would eagerly wait for him to return, because that's how they would get wine from him. And then he talks about how he got appointed as a judge of the Guwahati High Court. So Guwahati High Court, at that time was a high court that served 7 states. There were benches in all the 7 states, but there was just one. There were circuit benches. It is called circuit benches, where there's a high court, but a bench sits some at some place else also. So at that time it served 7 states, and he was appointed in at the age of 45. But when he was first recommended, his age was just 39 years. So he talks about how one of the CMs of the 7 states tried to hamper his elevation to the bench, and was successful in doing it. Uh, because if one has to be appointed a judge in Guwahati High Court, 7 CMs have to agree that okay, make him a judge. So he also talked about this, that that CM was a political adversary of his father in some sense, and that's why he hampered his elevation to the bench at a very young age. Uh, Even today, if we see, it is a rule, sort of. Exceptions are always there, that if one has to be elevated to the bench in a high court, the person should be at least 45 years of age. Then only can they be elevated. Then he um, uh, talks about something which is very interesting about Guwahati High Court, because at that time it used to serve 7 states, so the benches had very small number of judges available, like 2 or 3 judges only. So what used to happen? So, for example, if there's an order or a judgment from the single bench of the High Court, um, then it you can challenge it before a division bench, which consists of 2 judges. So if you want to challenge it, the single judge who passed that order cannot sit on that division bench. It is a rule. So he talks about this in the sense that the judges had to rotate every fortnight. So once first 15 days of the month they would be somewhere in Guwahati, and the last 15 days of the month they would be somewhere in Meghalaya or Tripura or Nagaland or Assam. Assam is in Guwahati. Guwahati is in Assam only, and Arunachal Pradesh and Mizoram. So these were the 7 states that they served, and he talks about how there was very poor infrastructure available at that time for the judges, which has now improved. But he talks about how he put up with hardships, while serving the while serving the country. And then he talks about only 2 times there was something that when he was influenced. First was when he was at the Guwahati High Court, and the second time it happened when he was in the Supreme Court. So first time when it happened was that the government there had inducted 6,000 constables in various districts, and all of those 6,000 appointments came to be challenged before the High Court. And the Chief Justice of that High Court allotted all these matters to him. They were all clubbed matters. So he went through all of those 6,000 appointments, upheld appointments in some districts, and struck down in most of the districts. And this was because he believes that he did all this fairly, and judged and adjudicated the matter very fairly, and saw all the documents if they were fair or not. He talks about how before this decision was made by him, this judgment was delivered by him, his mother was invited by the CM of Assam, Mr. Tarun Gogoi, and he told her that I believe in the independence of judiciary, but this matter that your son is hearing in the High Court is very important and very dear to me, and it must have political implications also if all of these appointments were not to be made, because if promises are made, they have to be fulfilled also. When his mother learned that the CM has called her for this purpose, she went from there, and when she told him about this, he was also very upset. But he says that he delivered that judgment very fairly. And the second instance where he believes that where he felt that he was tried to be persuaded or being pressurized into doing something, that was the interference with his judicial duties, was that the Matter of Nrc. You might know that Justice Gogoi was the judge who presided over this matter for a lot of years. when he was a judge and when he became the Chief Justice, even then. Um, he talks about how there was this high-ranking secretary of the Union of India who once came to meet him and tried to talk to him and tell him that he should go slow on this matter of NRC, because um, uh, as we'll discuss even later in the video, how he believed that the matter of NRC was a matter that was being exploited by every party, because it fed into the insecurities of everyone. It fed into the insecurities of even the migrants, and also the people who were the original residents of that area. And then just bef- uh, 2-3 months before he was to be elevated as the Chief Justice, he was transferred to the Punjab and Haryana High Court in Chandigarh. And after 3-4 months of his transfer, he was elevated as the Chief Justice of Punjab and Haryana. But there's a very funny incident how he talks about the file where his elevation, the paperwork for his elevation was untraceable in the law ministry. And he talks about a lot of he talks about a past incident regarding a judge, that there was this law minister and he had the file of a particular judge who was to be elevated. But as the law minister changed, the file that was there inside the seat of the sofa, and it went uh, it went to the with the old minister, and luckily after a lot of time that file was found. And that is how now judges say that your file may be in the sofa, and because it's untraceable. He laments about judicial delays everywhere, not just about the pendency, but also how the government tries to delay the judicial appointments at every given opportunity. Um, then he talks about a very sad period in his life that was for almost 6 months when he was the Chief Justice of Punjab and Haryana High Court. He um, became ill, and also he had to be admitted first to the PGI for some time, for 1 or 2 days, and then he uh, decided to go to Sir Gangaram Hospital for treatment. After a lot of time there, he again went back to Chandigarh, and then again he fell sick. So almost for 6 months continuously he was sick and in hospital. And he also talks about how it is not considered good for a person who is now in turn to be elevated to the Supreme Court to be unfit. So that is one of the reasons that so many people had now written him off, and the collegium was not considering his name at all. But then the Chief Justice of India at that time, I believe Mr. Kapadia, uh, did something, and he sent Justice Aldamas Kabir to who was the who was who was the head of Nalsa to Chandigarh for some function. And there he, because he was a judge of the Supreme Court, he obviously met the Chief Justice of Punjab and Haryana High Court. And at that time, for the whole day, Justice Gogoi was with Justice Kabir. And that's how Justice Kabir, who was the number 2 judge in the Supreme Court at that time, realized that Mr. Gogoi is now hale and hearty, and he is fit to be elevated to the Supreme Court. So in this way, he talks about how the Chief Justice of India at that time tried to convince all the other members of the collegium in some way or the other that Justice Gogoi was now hale and hearty and was fit to be elevated to be a judge of the Supreme Court. And when he was finally approved by the collegium, he got to know that now he will be the Chief Justice as well. Um, and he had not imagined it till then that he would be the Chief Justice of India one day. Then he talks about some of the things that are particular about Punjab and Haryana High Court. In Punjab and Haryana High Court, the sitting for the court commences at 10 a.m. and it is over by almost 11:45 to 12 mostly. He talks about that time. Now he does not know what goes on there. because at 1:45 or 12 there is a coffee break, there is a tea break, and most of the judges after that do not sit on the bench. They just head off to their homes. And he talks about how when he was the chief justice, he tried to demotivate, discourage this practice, but he was not successful because uh, it had now been ingrained into the habits and tradition of the High Court that the judges used to rise by 11:45 a.m. to 12 p.m. He also talks about how there is uh, there is a facility to organize a party at a very short notice, a full-fledged party in Punjab and Haryana High Court at a very short notice of 2 to 3 hours, and this facility was taken a lot of advantage by all the judges. So what used to happen was this, that there is a judge called a marshal judge. This is the J1 judge, that is the senior most judge after the chief justice in that particular high court. So these parties, the expenses on these parties were to be borne by the judge who was penalized by this martial judge. So this was called martial penalty. He, I would imagine that these judges were having a lot of fun there. And then he uh, talks about when he became the chief justice, how he dealt with mentioning. So mentioning in the courts is when you go to a particular court, mostly to the chief justice's court, but also sometimes to the courts where your matter is listed, or the court where your matter is usually heard. For example, if my matter is assigned in court number 5, I'll go there and mention that, my lords, my matter is not getting listed, please get it listed, or that I am asking for adjournment, things like that, right? So this mentioning happens when the court sits, and there is a roll call that if anybody wants to mention from case number 1 to 60, 1 to 10, 10 to 20, so it goes like that. So this is mentioning. When he became the chief justice of India, he did away with mentioning in every way. Like, he said that either that you can mention your matters only under two circumstances: either you are losing your life or you are losing your house. He says that it was a very, very ill-advised decision, and he also took it back, because he believes that it was now ingrained so much in the practice of the Supreme Court to mention matters, that it could not have been done away with. But the original thing that he had done was like this, that your matter will come up by itself within 4 days. But I don't think it was really successful, and that is the reason that he had to take it back. So there is one very interesting quote that he from the book, that he talk in the sense that he talks about the ways the courts in India are working. He says, on the whole, there was a virtual collapse of the system which was running on an everyday basis, with firefighting operations constantly at work instead of working to a well evolved plan. So for example, there's a case that is listed, you can just mention it for an urgent hearing, but the cases that are there for decades and decades now, nobody's hearing them. So all of this is, in a way, firefighting kind of mechanism that is at play. That urgent matters are some matters are categorized as urgent, and they are disposed of very at lightning speed. But some matters that are pending for decades now, nobody is hearing them. So he talks about the courts in India in this sense. And then he talks about how when he became the chief justice, he also introduced an amendment in the rules of the Supreme Court. Earlier there was a rule in the Supreme Court that there will always be at least two judges on the bench, because Supreme Court is the court of last resort, and the words said by the Supreme Court are final. So it was always considered best that at least two judges apply their mind to everything. But there was also this thing that some matters were not really of that importance. For example, say bail matters. Now, if you don't get bail today, it doesn't mean that you are forfeiting your right to apply for bail tomorrow after some time. But if it's a death penalty case, of course we need the application of mind. Or for example, if there is this sentencing case, rape matters, murder matters, where you are convicted, those are really matters that are very serious. We can believe that that these matters require at least application of mind by two judges. But bail matters, for example, he tells that how Justice Rishikesh Roy, who is still a judge at the Supreme Court, he heard the bail plea, or not bail plea, I guess, but uh, yeah, it was a tussle between Maharashtra government and CBI as to who will investigate the mysterious death of Sushant Singh Rajput, who was an actor. So in that case, I don't remember any other case where there was an order by a single judge of the Supreme Court. So that case was heard by a single judge in the Supreme Court. And then he talks about how there's a lot of overcrowding in the courtrooms, especially in the Supreme Court. For example, I have gone to the court number 1, that is the Chief Justice's court, and it's huge. But still, if there is some momentous landmark judgment that is going to come, then of course that hall will also be full. But other courtrooms are relatively very small. So he talks about when he was on the green bench, and he was sitting on that green bench with two other judges, and the judge who was presiding over that bench warned him in advance that there will be a lot of crowding in the courtroom, and also everybody will be shouting over each other. He writes in the book that 20 lawyers were at least 20 lawyers were arguing over each other in at the same time. And he also talks about how the Solicitor General of India at that time, who is now the great judge, Justice Rohinton Nariman at that time, when the bench asked where is the solicitor was standing at the gate, not being able to enter because there was a lot of crowd in the room. And he said that the solicitor is here but is unable to get in. And then he talks about how once there was this miscommunication between him and another judge in the Supreme Court, so that while sitting on this green bench, they heard a very important case. It was Karnataka mining case, and Justice Alam was about to retire from the Supreme Court. And just 5 days before Justice Alam was to retire, Justice Alam inquired from Justice Gogoi if he has written the judgment in the Karnataka mining case. Whereas Justice Gogoi thought that Justice Alam would be writing that judgment. But Justice Gogoi promised Justice Alam that he would be delivering that judgment, and he says that the next 4-5 days were extreme hell for him, and he wrote that judgment. He says that the floor in his room were filled with books, and I could imagine what would have happened to him. And then he talks about how sometimes some judges in the High Court who are junior in All India rankings from you, who are sometimes even who have been even your Chief Justice for some time, may be elevated late to the Supreme Court because you were belonging to a particular High Court. So, for example, Justice Gogoi here, his parent High Court was Guwahati High Court, whereas Justice Madan Lokur, he hailed from Delhi High Court. So Justice Lokur was also his Chief Justice for some time when he was the Chief Justice of Guwahati High Court. He talks about how Justice Lokur, who was senior to him, was elevated later to the Supreme Court than Justice Gogoi. He talks about there's a lot of factors that play into the minds of the collegium, because a lot of things have to be seen. For example, all India seniority has to be seen, but also the diversity also has to be maintained in the Supreme Court. For example, there are quotas of various high courts that have to be fulfilled. So because a judge from the Guwahati High Court was retiring, so he was first in the line of consideration in that sense to the Supreme Court, and he was elevated to the Supreme Court before Justice Madan Lokur, who was indeed his senior otherwise. And then he talks about a very interesting case of contempt that was initiated by a bench that was headed by him, or maybe he was a part of that bench. I'm not sure if he presided over that bench or he was a justice on that bench, but there was this case about a contempt proceedings initiated against another judge of the Supreme Court who had retired by then, Justice Karju. Justice Karju had written a blog, and in that he had said that there are only two worthy judges on the bench in the Supreme Court at this time, and that is that Justice Nariman and Justice Chelameswar. All the other judges are not fit to be judges of the Supreme Court. So Justice Karju was called to the Supreme Court for some other matter, but uh, Justice Gogoi gave this blog that he had written to the Attorney General at that time, uh, um, and asked him what he thought of him. And the Attorney General was Mr. Mukul Rohtagi, and he said that it is contempt of court. It is contemptuous. And then Justice Gogoi revealed to Mr. Rohtagi that this blog has been written by Justice Karju. And then he says that Justice Rohtagi also tried to shirk and say things like, tried to shirk that he had just said that it is contemptuous in nature. And then then Justice Karju also got very angry in the courtroom, saying that I deserve to be treated as respect because I'm a former judge of this court itself. And then he says that Justice Karju says that he deserves to be treated with respect because he's a former judge of this court, but he does not treat with respect the sitting judges of this court. Then he talks about how there's this practice of senior advocates rushing into the Supreme Court on days that are miscellaneous days. So miscellaneous days in the Supreme Court are Monday and Friday. Sometimes they run over into sometimes Tuesday and Wednesday also, but mostly scheduled days of miscellaneous days are Monday and Friday. So what he says is that on these miscellaneous days, these senior advocates who are engaged by paying lakhs and lakhs of rupees appear before the court just for a minute or two, and then it's done. The work is done, but they do not appear with same numbers on regular days, because then they will have to argue for hours and hours and hours. And he says that they make very quick bucks because these senior lawyers, they charge by appearance and not the amount of time that they argued. Then he also talks about how bungalows in Lutyens, Delhi are allotted to the judges of the Supreme Court. He says that there is a Supreme Court judges pool through which judges are allotted bungalows. But he also talked about how once sometimes when the judges are transferred and when they are elevated to the Supreme Court, they are not able to find residence, and because the bungalows are not available, and they have to stay in the Supreme Court guest house or state guest house for a prolonged period. He talks about one particular judge of the Supreme Court who is still not able to get a bungalow that they deserve. That is a matter of right reserved for them, and because they are not available. He talks about these kind of hardships that are also that the judges have to undergo. He also talks about how 5 Krishna Menon Marg is the official residence of the Chief Justice of India, and when he became the Chief Justice of India, he did not shift in that bungalow at once, and ordered and because he believed that it requires a lot of repairs, and for 5-6 months this repair work went on, and when it was completely refurbished, and because he believes that the Chief Justice of India is a class in itself, and that has to reflect in the residence where they live. And then he comes to the very contentious part of collegium, where everybody says that it's very opaque and it tries to shake accountability. He talks about some of the instances when he was a member of the collegium, but not as yet had not become the Chief Justice of India. He talks about the collegium that was headed by the Chief Justice T.S. Thakur. In that there were also Justice Kher and Mishra, and he talks about how these two justices tried to hamper the work that was being done by the Thakur Collegium. He talks about how whenever Justice Thakur would propose some name to be for the elevation to the Supreme Court, they would say that they would require some time to consider it and get some details about it. But then once just a month before Justice Thakur was to retire, he called a meeting of the collegium and asked everyone straight away if they wanted to do some business or not. And Justice Misra and Justice Kher did not say even a word, and that's when he called the meeting off. So just because just because there's not a lot of collegiality in collegium, a lot of work is hampered, is the impression that we get through this episode that he tells in the book. And then he talks about a lot of times when Justice Chelameshwar walked out of the collegium meetings, and then there was another judge that I just called a great judge, Justice Nariman, for reasons that I find to be very valid, did not chose to stay away from the meetings of the collegium. And that's why the recent 9 appointments that were made in the Supreme Court, they were also made a little late after Honorable Justice Nariman retired. And the main reason that Justice Chelameshwar was angry and walking out of the meetings and things like that were happening, and also chose not to attend some meetings of the collegium, was that one particular judge of the Honorable Supreme Court right now, but then he was the Chief Justice of the Uttarakhand High Court, Justice K.M. Joseph, was not being elevated to the Supreme Court, and he wanted that it should happen. But then when the collegium under Chief Justice of that times Chief Justice Deepak Misra Collegium recommended that Honorable Justice Joseph be appointed to the Supreme Court, the government didn't want to appoint him, because one of the things that he has done is that when President's rule was imposed by the BJP government in Uttarakhand, he had struck it down and reinstated the Congress government in Uttarakhand, and that was something that the government didn't like, and that's why they were trying to. That's the impression everybody gets, that they were trying to hamper the appointment of the elevation of Justice Joseph in the Supreme Court. But he reveals in the book that he has reasons to believe that it was the Chief Justice of that time, Justice Misra, who threatened the government to resign if the appointment was not made. Then he talks about two recommendations that were finalized by the collegium but were never made. These were 2 judges, both Chief Justices of 2 High Courts, Justice Nadrajog and Justice Rajendra Menon. Both of them had their fair share of controversies, in which I don't want to go because it's not very important at this point of time. Then he also defends opacity in the working of the collegium system, because he believes that when reasons are revealed in public for why a particular judge of the High Court is not being made the Chief Justice of the High Court, or why a particular Chief Justice of the High Court is not being elevated to the Supreme Court, their credibility is diminished. And he gives 2-3 examples also as to why all of this is important. Some of it is believable, and a hell lot of it is not really, because he talks about how there's a lot of transparency because orders are passed and the letters are sent to the law minister, but we all got to see all these letters and those proposals because he published them in his book. Otherwise there's no accountability at all of the collegium. And recently let's not get into that. And then he talks about a very huge controversy that happened, that was regarding Honorable Justice Akil Qureshi. He is the Chief Justice presently of Rajasthan High Court, but he hailed from Gujarat High Court. There, when the Chief Justice retired, he was the number 2 judge, so he had to be appointed as the acting Chief Justice of that particular High Court. But he was not made the acting Chief Justice by the central government. the notification was issued that the judge who was junior to him, Justice Dave, he was made the acting Chief Justice, and the Gujarat bar was not happy with it, and they also organized protests about it. Then he was transferred to the Bombay High Court, and that also did not go well down. Did not go down well with a lot of people because his seniority was compromised, and then the recommendation was made by the collegium that he be made the Chief Justice of Madhya Pradesh, uh, and it was not accepted by the government. Government in written gave some objections to it, which he reveals about some judicial work that he had done, and the government was not happy about appointing him as the Chief Justice of Madhya Pradesh High Court, which was relatively uh, a big high court. Then the collegium proposed his name for the for Tripura High Court, and recently he was transferred from Tripura to Rajasthan High Court, which is relatively big high court. But one of the impressions that one gets is that when a person is transferred or elevated as a Chief Justice of the high courts in the northeast, for example, the small high courts like Manipur High Court or Meghalaya High Court or Tripura High Court, it is a kind of punishment, or that person did not deserve to be the Chief Justice. He also talks about how there was another Chief Justice of Madras High Court, I believe, Justice Talis Ramani, if I am not pronouncing her name wrong. She resigned because she was transferred as a Chief Justice from Madras High Court, which is a huge high court and has a legacy of its own, one of the oldest high courts in this country. From there, she was transferred to, I believe, Manipur High Court, and he talks about how all high courts are equal and the perks given are the same to every Chief Justice, and the consideration that is given by the collegium for the elevation to the Supreme Court is also equal. But the impression one gets is that these are penalty promotions, elevations, or transfers. Then he talks about Justice A.P. Shah. Now, Justice A.P. Shah is kind of a darling of the media because he delivered a judgment in Section 377 homosexuality case when he was a judge in the Delhi High Court. Right there, he decriminalized homosexuality. He was sitting with another judge, Justice S. Muralidhar, whose case we will also discuss here. So then he decriminalized gay sex, and then all of this, many people wanted to see him to be elevated to the Supreme Court because they thought, what a brilliant judge, which I really don't believe, that just because a judge gave a particular judgment, and it could have also gone the other way. For example, if he had given it the other way, would he not have been genius? Just because he was conservative does not mean he was not genius. So, he became a darling of the media at that time, and when he was not elevated to the Supreme Court, people started to attack the Chief Justice of that time, I think Justice Kapadia, that he was hindering his elevation to the Supreme Court. What a brilliant judge, and not being appointed to the Supreme Court like that. So he talks about how there was some controversy regarding him when he was the Chief Justice of the Madras High Court, and there was some land dealings case that should ideally have been heard in the open court, but was heard by him in camera proceedings, which was a controversy, and 20 advocates of the Madras High Court had written to the Chief Justice of India complaining about this. So there was this controversy regarding him that he reveals in the book that hindered his appointment to the Supreme Court. And then he talks about a judge who's not named, but is but anybody can guess who knows about judiciary that he's talking about Justice S. Muralidhar. He talks about a judgment that was delivered by him, rather an order that a particular person be released from jail, means bail was granted by him. It was granted on 29th of a particular month, and on the same day the central government approached the Honorable Supreme Court saying that please stay this order. The Honorable Supreme Court said that okay, we'll hear this case the very next day on the 30th of that month, but it is revealed by him, and I don't know how much of it is true or not, but he says that Justice Muralidhar went ahead at 5:20 p.m., which is rather unusual, and ordered the release of that prisoner. He says that it was brought to the notice of the particular High Court judge that the Honorable Supreme Court is going to hear this matter the very next day, but he ordered the release and the prisoner was released. He says that this is judicial indiscipline because the High Courts have to show deference to the Honorable Supreme Court, and the district judiciary has to show some deference towards the Honorable High Courts. And this is one of the reasons he says that, um, uh, he talks about when he talks about Justice Muralidhar. And then he talks about the infamous press conference that was organized by the judges of the Honorable Supreme Court, where there were four judges: Justice Chela Maheshwar, Justice Gogoi, Justice Lokur, and Justice Kulin Joseph. And he says that all of these four members, they met in chambers, means inside the court, and they finalized that yes, we need to talk to the press, and they all agreed about it. But what Justice Gogoi had thought, that there will be some tea coffee kind of thing with the press, and some of the 4-5 journalists who usually cover the Supreme Court will be there, and they will talk about these things with them. But when he reached Justice Chela Maheshwar's residence, he saw even those TV vans standing outside, and all of this was being live telecasted. And he said that now he could not have backed off, because he agreed to it, not the magnanimity of it, but he agreed to doing it. So he says that that when one of the advocates, very respected advocate, senior advocate Miss Indira Jaising, asked him if one of the main reasons for this presser was Judge Lohiya's death and how the Supreme Court and Bombay High Court dealt with those matters, he said yes. He said that he wanted to, he could have answered it in some other ways, or even, ignored that question. Then he talks about another controversy that happened about Master of Roster. He says that when he was the Chief Justice, it all went very smooth, even when he was hearing the Ayodhya matter for 4 months. For 4 months continuously he was hearing that matter, and during that time all the mentionings were made before the senior most judge available, that was Honorable Justice Ramanna, who is presently the Chief Justice of India. He talks about how there was never any friction or any misgivings about any of the orders that were passed by Honorable Mr. Justice Ramanna while he was taking care of the mentionings. But he talks about this incident, which was also very infamous, and which happened with Justice Chela Maheshwar. When this happened, Honorable Mr. Justice Chela Maheshwar was number 2 judge in the Supreme Court, and the Chief Justice of that time, Honorable Mr. Justice Deepak Mishra, was the Chief Justice, and he was hearing a constitutional case. Now the practice is that if the Chief Justice is engaged in some constitution bench, then the mentionings cannot be made there, because constitution bench matters are way too serious. So they always go to the number 2 judge. And there was this particular matter it's called medical college case, and it is a corruption case, and a particular an acting Chief Justice of a particular High Court is also imprisoned because of this case. So what happened was this, that there were allegations even against the Chief Justice of India, Deepak Mishra, in this case, and this case was the mentioning for this case was done before Justice Chela Maheshwar, and Justice Chela Maheshwar said that these allegations are way too serious and they cannot be ignored, and the constitution bench of the first 5 judges, excluding the Chief Justice, should hear this case. Now, because this went against the Chief Justice, the very next day, or maybe on the same day, he brought a constitution bench together and ruled that the Chief Justice is the master of the roster, and nobody can take that power away from him. Whereas Justice Chela Maheshwar was very well within his rights to pass that order, because he was in charge of mentionings on that day. And these are all very dark things. Nobody talks about these things. I don't know why Justice Mishra has since retired and not talked about these things, because allegations were made against him. No inquiry has been conducted against him, because if a judge of the Supreme Court is saying that these are very serious allegations, and He says that FIR was placed before him, material was there before him, but nobody talked about it after that. After that, he talks about um there were some rumors about him being superseded because he had held that press conference, and he also went to Ramnath Goenka Memorial, where he said about how judiciary should be independent and judges should be loud also, they should make their voices heard, and how some people in power did not like it, and there were rumors about how there must be supersession again, just like it happened during the emergency. And he says that he never believed them, because there is a practice in the Supreme Court, and that is that exactly 1 month before a chief justice is to retire, they they talk with the next out the chief justice, the one who will be made the chief justice after him, and tell him that I am recommending your name, right? So this is a kind of tradition. So 1 month before that, 1 month before Justice Mishra was to retire, he he talked with him and told him that I have recommended your name for the chief justiceship. Now the usual practice also is this, that the chief justice go when they are they go to the tea lounge with all the judges. They tell to the other honorable judges also that I have recommended the name of our very senior judge for the chief justice for the chief justiceship. But the Justice Mishra never told the whole court that this has happened, uh, and there were and thus the speculations were there until the warrant of the warrant came from the president. There were a lot of speculations, and he says that he was quite confident that he would be made the Chief Justice of India and would not be superseded at all, because he says that there's another thing, that a Chief Justice has zero discretion in deciding who will be the next Chief Justice, because everything has been decided as per seniority, and seniority in judiciary is everything. um, if a chief justice decides that a person who is going to be the chief justice should not be chief justice, he has to consult with so many other judges of the court, and such things have to be done. An outgoing chief justice cannot do anything at all. He says that even an outgoing chief justice, before a month he retires, a month prior to his retirement, cannot do a lot of work that is a work of the chief justice of India. They can only undertake the regular work. And then he talks about how when he was just elevated to the Supreme Court, he heard a very important case. That case challenged the appointment of President Mr. Pranab Mukherjee, uh, his election as the President of India. He wrote a dissent in it, and in a way he ruled against the president in that case, and in that he was joined by Justice Chelameswar. And then he talks about another judgment that was delivered by him. Uh, the name of that case is Lok Prahari v State of Uttar Pradesh. You might remember this case because there was this law in UP, that all the chief ministers who are former chief ministers will be allotted a government bungalow, and they will be provided with a lot of amenities, because the law believed that they are a class in themselves and they deserve it. But the Supreme Court struck it down, and he was the part of that bench. And then he talks about he laments about how some newspapers and some web portals command a lot of power, in the sense that these are the entities that give every judge a certificate as to if they are a right judge, a corrupt judge, or they deserve to be a judge or not. Uh, then he talks about another very important case, that is about Alok Kumar Verma, who was the CBI director at that time, and the Central Vigilance Commissioner um, had dismissed him and appointed some other person. But it also went against another thing that was there in the law, that section 4 subclause 1 of DSPE Act of 1946 said that the CBI director can only be appointed and removed by a collegium itself, that was comprising of the Prime Minister, the Chief Justice of India, and the leader of opposition. And then he talks about Rafael matters and Sabri matters and Kashmir matters, In Rafael matter, he tries to exonerate himself by saying that this judgment was not just written by him alone. There were other judges on the bench also. So, you know, and then he talks about the Sabrimala judgment. Now, the Sabrimala thing is that we all know that there is this judgment of the Honorable Supreme Court that says that women have to be allowed inside the premises of the Sabrimala temple, but that judgment is now, at present, it is stayed because the Supreme Court is going to decide on a bigger issue that might impact this judgment, and the decision to stay this judgment was taken by a 5-judge bench, out of which 3 judges agreed to review this judgment, whereas 2 judges, who were Justice Chandrachud and Justice Nariman, decried as to what was the need to review this judgment, whereas they believed that it was a very correct judgment. Now, when he talks about Kashmir cases, because all of this, the abrogation of 370 happened when he was the Chief Justice, and a lot of human rights violations allegedly also happened when he was the Chief Justice, and he was alleged to not being taking these matters on a priority basis or seriously. He says that he dealt with some habeas corpus petitions, and the way they were dealt, personally I feel no habeas corpus petition has to be dealt in that way. He was not calling that persons to the court, but he was sending people to those persons, which is like violation of every law that the limited knowledge of law that I have. Then he talks about how when he was hearing Ayodhya matter and he could not get time, so he transferred all the important Kashmir cases to another very senior judge who was available at that time, Justice Ramanna, who is now the Chief Justice. Because of this, Justice Ramanna delivered a good judgment in Anuradha Bhasin, where he said all the good things about how internet is very important for, and it is protected under fundamental freedom to trade and freedom of expression also, but he did not really provide any real relief to the people of Kashmir. And then he talks about the sexual harassment allegations. Much has been said about it. The main thing that he talks about is that lady who had pressed those allegations against him, she was reinstated in the Supreme Court. He says that she was not reinstated in the Supreme Court during the tenure of my predecessor. She was reinstated during the tenure of Justice Gogoi himself, he reveals. But the decision to reinstate her or not was taken by the senior most judge at that time, was Justice Bobde. He says that Justice Bobde took a humanitarian take on the whole matter and decided to reinstate her. Then he talks about NRC. Now, NRC, as I said, was the other place where he felt that he was tried to be pressurized by the executive to rule a way, or rather not to rule in this matter, because they wanted him to go slow on this matter. Then Ayodhya case, which is like must talk about. I think it is the biggest decision of his life he has taken, because voluminous records, thousands and thousands of pages of everything, 4,000 pages of judgment by the Honorable High Court in that matter. And what needs to be criticized here is the conduct of all the 5 judges who took part in the celebratory dinner after the judgment was delivered, because one side had lost and the another had won, and there was nothing to celebrate about it. That needs to be criticized at all costs. The last thing that he talks about is his entry in the Rajya Sabha as a superhero former Chief Justice of India under the Article 80 of the Indian Constitution. Now, that is, in my personal belief, is something that is unbecoming of of a former Chief Justice of India, because you retired from the zenith of the judiciary, and then you go to the Rajya Sabha, which is considered a part of politics, and that also so soon, just after some weeks of your retirement, you went there. And he says the only thing that he says is that just because this is made by the president, I'm going to accept it. So Prime Minister is also appointed by the President, except that also become a cabinet minister, become a governor. What is the difference between a nominated member of the Rajya Sabha and all others? They are all appointed by the President, and nobody can say that just because it is a nominated membership, I am quite free. I don't think so. I don't think so, because the government has appointed you. Now it is a kind of a burden on you also, that you do something for them, or if you don't do it, you would be selfish. So this was my book review and summary for this book, which has gone quite long. I won't take you lot long now. I'd say that for understanding his take, we need to read it. And I must say this, that my opinion of him is not very good, because of whatever he did during his chief justiceship. But it is certainly a little moderated because of the way he has given some explanations, and some things that he talks about, they make sense. But overall, he was, to say the least, a terrible Chief Justice of India. I don't think that we deserve one like him in the future at all. To learn lessons also, we need to read it, to appoint judges maybe in a better way now, because a lot in India depends upon the judiciary, because judiciary is our last resort. The governments, they are deaf. Nobody can go there. We don't know where to go. But in court, we know at least that this is the court number where we have to go, and we will be given a hearing. And at the end of the day, we'll be having a reasoned order, accepting our arguments or not accepting our arguments. So in that way, judiciary is very important to be protected at all costs, and some accountability has to be established, in the sense that wrong people are not appointed, and the better people are not left out of the system. Thank you very much for watching. I'll be back sometime soon. Till then, take care, stay safe. Thank you very much for watching.